A Modern Day Samson Meets Jezebel. By James Griffin. The following story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Dedication. This story was written in memory of my recently departed younger brother, Justin Bree Heflin. I know that the world, including me, often focused on your shortcomings, yet now as I sit here and reflect on your life, all I can see are my own. I wish that I would have told you how much you meant to me, and how much I loved you, not just in words but in actions. I wish that my Christian faith could have impacted your life, not with mere stories or sermons, but with a brotherly influence. Justin, I now know that there was an untapped strength hidden inside of you that would have made you my Samson, my superhero, but I didn't see it at the time. I only wish that I had been yours. Introduction. The Messianic Jewish community of Hilltop has been under attack by a violent anti-Semitic group, calling themselves the Have-Nots. See or listen to the story, A Modern Day Samson, available on YouTube or in written format through Amazon.com. This band of thugs has been smashing out windows, vandalizing churches, and threatening those that were unfortunate enough to encounter them. Finally, David Abram, a local attorney, who has studied from an early age in a variety of styles of kung fu, karate, and judo, a true master with multiple ancient weapons, who has developed an infatuation for powerlifting, gymnastics, and cardio exercise, makes a stand against this radical hate group. David was always taught to protect his people, and now that the time has come, he cannot shake the words of Mordecai found in Esther 4 verse 14 when he asks Esther the haunting question, "Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Perhaps, David, likewise came to the community of Hilltop for such a time as this. So, in the guise of his alter ego, Samson, David makes his stand, and the ensuing confrontation was more violent than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 1, The Aftermath. It's funny because, despite all of his training, David had never been in an actual fight, at least not until he made his stand against the Have-Nots, but now here he is laying in a hospital bed wearing the guise of a vigilante, all banged up, surrounded by men that he, in turn, had beaten into submission. City Councilman Benjamin Meyer, swarmed by reporters, walks into the emergency room with a look of concern on his face. What has happened here? Councilman Meyer asks aloud to no one in particular. Officer Bill Rhodes, seeing him, immediately makes a beeline toward the councilman, whispering to one of the nurses, "Get Samson out of here before it's too late." The nurse and two orderlies quickly go to the small exam room where Samson is, and they wheel him out and down the hall, taking him to an elevator, and moving him to a private room on a lower floor where he can remain hidden. Officer Rhodes approaches the councilman. "Excuse me, sir, I'm Officer William Rhodes, I'm the officer in charge," Bill says, extending his hand toward the councilman. Councilman Meyer ignores Officer Rhodes' gesture of politeness, instead walking away from him, going from patient to patient, calling out, "Nurse, where is this street thug that injured all of these poor men?" One of the doctors runs over to the councilman. "Excuse me, sir, I'm Dr. Ackerman, is there something that I can help you with?" "Yes, where is the criminal that caused all of these injuries?" "The criminal? What criminal?" Dr. Ackerman asks, in a nearly disgusted tone, almost showing his true feelings. For he, like other members of the hospital staff, knows that Samson is a hero. This is why so many of them, along with some members of the police force, are going out of their way to protect him. "Well, Mr. Meyer, I assume that there was another gang involved in this altercation. I realize that someone hurt all of these men, but I don't believe that there was just a single combatant that did all of this damage as you claim, but so far no one from the opposing gang has been brought in." "Well, doctor, to start with, you will refer to me as Councilman Meyer, not Mr. Meyer, and my sources tell me that there was only one assailant, and they also tell me that he is here." With this, Councilman Meyer walks away from Dr. Ackerman, meeting with his wife Jessie, and two well-dressed men near the center of the room. Jessie motions to her two subordinates, "Find him, we know that he is here." "Yes, ma'am," the two men respond in unison. The two men instantly begin going from room to room, throwing open doors and walking in, searching each without a moment of hesitation. The head nurse, an RN by the name of Sarah Elkin, begins following the two men. "Excuse me, gentlemen, can I help you with something?" "Excuse me." Finally, hospital security arrives, but before they can say a word, the two men open their sports coats, showing the officers that they are armed. With this, hospital security instantly backs off, advising Nurse Elkin to do the same. Officer Rhodes, seeing what is transpiring, calls out to the two men, "Hold it right there." "No, you hold it, Jessica Meyer," Councilman Meyer's wife, yells at Officer Rhodes. As the councilman's security, these two men are sworn Laramie police officers, so they are well within their rights to search this or any other public location that I tell them to. But they are intimidating people with their firearms, and they are going into people's hospital rooms without permission, Mrs. Meyer. Officer Rhodes retorts. "Then produce this Samson to my husband, and the courts, and then my men will discontinue their search." "Do your job, Officer Rhodes, then my men won't have to," Jessica Meyer demands. Officer Rhodes just stands there dumbfounded, shocked that Mrs. Meyer not only knows that there is a Samson, but also that he has been brought to this hospital. Luckily, hospital staff has smuggled Samson to a different floor, but as Bill watches the two henchmen continue their search, he picks up his cell phone and with a quick, "Get him out of here," passes the word on that Samson needs to be removed from the hospital as quickly as possible. As Councilman and Mrs. Meyer realize the futility of locating Samson, they turn to the many reporters they have in tow. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Councilman Meyer begins, "tonight the streets of a well-respected community became a war zone, where the personal vendetta of two opposing forces collided with no thought or concern for the welfare of the people. We, the City Council of Laramie, Illinois, will conduct a full investigation, and we will ensure that all participating parties are brought to justice. I have full confidence that not only my husband, but the council as a whole," Mrs. Jessica Meyer adds, "will take any measure required to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again." With these words, the press conference concludes, and Councilman and Mrs. Meyer, as well as the press corps, leave the hospital, with only Mrs. Meyer's security remaining to continue with their search for Samson. Chapter 2: Political Agenda. As a devout humanist, Jessica Meyer hates all religions, but especially monotheistic ones such as Judaism and Christianity, which dominate the neighborhood of Hilltop. "You know, Ben, we could use this gang warfare as a means of achieving some of our personal goals. I mean, think about it. What caused this altercation?" Ben Meyer looks at his wife dismissively. "What agenda are you talking about?" Ben asks his wife. "I'm talking about the eradication of the divisive influence of religion on our community. Think about it, Ben, this street fight was all caused by religion, and the only way that we can ensure that nothing like this ever happens again is to shut down the churches and the synagogues of Hilltop." "We can't do that," Ben replies meekly. "Oh, my love, we can do pretty much anything that we set our minds to. You follow my lead, and I'll do the rest. Do what you think is best." Councilman Meyer consents half-heartedly. "Tomorrow, I want you to look around the city of Hilltop, and find a location for your new campaign headquarters. Any location that you want," Jessica says to her husband sternly. "But what about our headquarters in Palmdale?" Ben asks, rather confused. "We can keep Palmdale open, but your primary headquarters, the one that you will operate out of, will be Hilltop, trust me," Jessica says confidently. "I will always trust you, Jess," Ben responds, not fully understanding the plan, but having full confidence in the woman that is concocting it. The next morning, just as he had been instructed, Councilman Meyer and his campaign manager Stephen Adams are out bright and early, driving the main thoroughfare of Hilltop when they come across what both men consider to be the perfect campaign headquarters. It has traditional storefront windows on each side of the main entrance, and it stands just across the street from the local police precinct. The sign outside of the shop says, "Greenberg's Printing Service." "Sadly, it's not for sale," Stephen says to his boss. "No, my friend, everything is for sale," Councilman Meyer assures him. "Just follow me." Once inside the old print shop, Councilman Meyer addresses the elderly shopkeeper. "Good morning, sir. I'm City Councilman Benjamin Meyer. I was wanting to inquire how much it would take to purchase your little shop." "Oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Meyer, but my shop isn't for sale," Mr. Greenberg replies politely. "Come now, sir, there is no need to haggle with me over price. You name your price, and if it's within reason, you'll have it. Now, what is your price?" Councilman Meyer asks again sharply. "Sir, I know to you this looks just like any old storefront, but to me, it is much more," Mr. Greenberg says nervously. "This store was once my father's and my grandfather's before him. They each operated a clock shop out of it. I still operate a clock shop on the side. If you look just behind the counter," Mr. Greenberg adds with a slight smile, "more for old times." "I didn't ask for a history lesson, Mr. Greenberg," Councilman Meyer says, cutting off the kindly shopkeeper in mid-sentence. "I asked for a price." "Well, there isn't one," Mr. Greenberg says as boldly as he can, as he walks over to the main door, opening it. "I've tried to be polite, but now I'm going to have to ask you and your associate to leave." Councilman Meyer begins to laugh angrily. Fine, keep your crummy store, but you better hope it is up to code because I'll have city inspectors crawling all over it, and trust me, when they're done your family won't even be allowed to come in here. Good day, gentlemen, Mr. Greenberg says in a huff, holding his shop door open. Councilman Meyer stands there, with hate in his eyes, glaring at Mr. Greenberg. Finally, reluctantly, breaking eye contact, he says, "Come on, Stephen, let's go. We will let the old man keep his shop for now, but I or one of my associates will be in touch." With that, both men exit the store, getting back in their chauffeur-driven car, but rather than drive off they sit out front of the store with their car idling. Councilman Meyer takes his cell phone out and dials his wife Jessica's number. "Hi Jess, yeah, this is Ben. Well, I found the perfect place, but the old man that owns it refuses to sell it. It's an old print shop right across from the Hilltop police precinct, and the old geezer was pretty rude about the entire thing. I'm not accustomed to being treated like that, especially in front of one of my employees. It's okay, honey, just go back to our Palmdale location and I'll take care of everything, but be sure you keep Stephen with you, and stay as public as you can, but not in Hilltop," Jessica instructs. "Why, what are you going to do?" Ben asks, almost nervously. "Don't you worry about it. I won't allow some old fool to humiliate the man that I love." "Thank you, Jess, I don't know what I ever did to deserve you." With those words, Councilman Meyer ends the call and orders his driver to take him and Stephen to their Palmdale campaign headquarters. Jessica in the meantime calls out for her 2 security guards. The 2 well-dressed young men, Anton and Marcus, come running, for what Councilman Meyer doesn't know about his lovely young wife is that she is not just the wife of a city councilman, she is also highly placed in the Raimondo crime family. Her connection with the family is through her father Frank, the Reaper, Carden, a chief lieutenant under Al the Sandman Raimondo. The 2 security men that Jessica has with her at all times, though sworn law enforcement officers through their connection with Councilman Meyer, are primarily mafia enforcers, and they do anything that Jezebel Meyer tells them to do. "Gentlemen," the proprietor of Jessica pauses as she looks down at her phone's internet. Mr. Greenberg's print shop is unwilling to sell his store to my husband, and despite how courteous my husband was to him, his refusal was very rude. I'd like the 2 of you to visit him, and handle him just as you once did former city councilman Fine when he refused to relinquish his position to my husband." Anton and Marcus glance at one another, and Anton, the more dominant of the 2, responds with, "Mr. Greenberg is already dead, he just doesn't know it yet." Jessica then goes into morbid details, explaining how she wants this handled. The men then leave the room, instructions in hand, as Jessica turns on her television to watch the local news. Chapter 3, Innocent Blood. As the 2 enforcers arrive, they make note of the busy police department right next door. "We are going to have to do this as quietly as possible," Anton says, "we have our instructions." Anton and Marcus jump out of their vehicle, looking in all directions, doing their best to go unnoticed. As they step inside the old print shop, Marcus flips the open sign to closed and then locks the door behind him. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Mr. Greenberg asks nervously. Without a word the 2 toughs set upon the frightened old man, following Jessica's instructions to a T. A few minutes later Anton and Marcus leave the store, cash register contents in hand, both men discussing where they should go for lunch. A few hours later David Abrams, also known as Samson, cell phone rings. Looking down he notes that the call is coming from Officer Rhodes. "Hey Bill, what's up?" David asks. "Hi Dave, I hate to bother you as I know that your ribs are still healing, but if you can, could you come by Greenberg's printing shop? It's right across the street from the police department." "Sure, I know where it's at," Dave says cheerily. "I'll be down in just a few minutes." When David arrives, the print shop is full of police officers. David shows his officer of the court ID to the police officer at the front door and then enters inquisitively. Looking from one direction to another, he notices Mr. Greenberg's lifeless body lying on the floor just in front of the counter, a white swastika, like those used by the have-nots when tagging their territory, spray painted on the side of the counter just beside the body. "Hey," Officer Rhodes calls out to his old friend. "Wow, I'm kind of regretting my cheery mood earlier," David says. "So, what happened here?" "Well," Bill says, "we are meant to believe that Mr. Greenberg is a victim of the have-nots." "And we don't believe this?" David asks. "Well, we might have, but Mr. Greenberg's wife told me that her husband had an altercation with Councilman Meyer yesterday. Meyer wanted to buy Mr. Greenberg's storefront, but Mr. Greenberg wasn't willing to sell it." "Well, that could have been a coincidence," David responds. "Maybe," Officer Rhodes replies, "but is it also a coincidence that Meyer's campaign manager, Stephen Adams, called Mrs. Greenberg back this morning, just in case she and her, now late, husband changed their minds. So why would Meyer want this old building? David asks curiously. Mrs. Greenberg said that he is wanting to use it as a campaign headquarters. Surely even Councilman Meyer wouldn't kill someone for a campaign office. I don't know, but it does seem a little suspicious, but sadly in his position of power, I would need more than just suspicion. It seems he went to his Palmdale office right after he left here, so he has an impeccable alibi. Officer Rhodes says quietly. I wonder where his wife's 2 rent-a-cops were at. Good question, but sadly until I get some evidence, I can't even ask them. After 4 days of investigation, and no additional evidence located, Officer Rhodes reluctantly has to close the case as just another act of violence perpetrated by the have-nots, even though he knows the notorious hate group has not been in town since their confrontation with his friend David, also the vigilante Samson, which was over 4 weeks ago. The day after the investigation is closed, Councilman Meyer shows up at the old print shop with what seems like his own personal press corps in tow. Moving men jump from trucks, and begin running in and out of the old storefront, emptying it of its content as Meyer turns to face the press to make a statement. What in the world? David says to Officer Rhodes as they both stand outside the police station, watching the festivities. Yeah, apparently the good councilman has been following my investigation pretty closely, because no sooner did my administration force me to close it, than his attorney, with contracts in hand, shows up at Mr. Greenberg's widow's home. Well, now it looks as if Meyer is about to give a press conference, right there at Mr. Greenberg's store. David says curiously, perhaps we should go listen in. The 2 men shuffle across the street, gathering with the curious onlookers. City Councilman Meyer steps behind a small portable podium that his moving men had put in place, as he stands in front of his newly acquired storefront, which was formerly known as Greenberg Printing. He begins to address the crowd gathering. I know that most of you are probably shocked to see me here in Hilltop, especially after the many recent acts of violence that have happened here. You are probably saying to yourself, Brother Meyer, as a fellow Jew, this is the last place that you should be. Well, maybe you are right. Maybe I should hide away in Palmdale, denying my heritage, but then again as a civic leader, and a man of the people, perhaps my place is right here with you, for I am after all one of you. As you know, less than a week ago, Ephraim Greenberg, a respected member of the Jewish community, was struck down by the have-nots. Have the police done anything to bring the killers to justice? No, they have not. Maybe my presence here won't accomplish a thing, but after hearing about Mr. Greenberg's murder I had to come to Hilltop, so I was thrilled when his poor widow embraced my campaign by selling me his old storefront location. No, I've never considered opening an office in Hilltop before, but maybe if I had, Mr. Greenberg would still be here. Allow my presence here to be in honor of Mr. Greenberg, and to be in defense of you, my constituents, and my brethren. As for the violence, as if in answer to his last statement, Councilman Meyer and all of his people began shaking their fists and chanting, "Make it stop! Make it stop!" David and Officer Rhodes just stand there in disbelief. So, he has come here solely based on Mr. Greenberg's death, yet he fought with Mr. Greenberg the day that he died because Mr. Greenberg refused to sell this store to him. Sounds to me like, whether he was involved or not, Mr. Greenberg's death had nothing to do with his coming here. Rhodes said, shaking his head. Not responding to his friend, David begins calling out to Councilman Meyer, "Excuse me, Councilman Meyer, may I have just a moment, sir?" "Certainly," Meyer responds, "I always have time for the press." "Well, I'm not actually from the press, I'm David Abram, attorney at law, and I was quite inspired by your words, for you see I specialize in civil rights law. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Abram. If I were you, I would keep an eye on local law enforcement," Councilman Meyer says, motioning toward Officer Rhodes. "I mean, I hate to say it, as a civil servant myself, but I know the police are holding back because there was another party involved in that huge gang fight that took place here a little over a month ago. There was a vigilante named Samson, and they failed to bring charges against him. That's interesting, as I heard that there was just the have-nots and a large group of citizens defending themselves. Trust me, citizens did not cause the damage that I saw that night, but just mark my word, Mr. Abram, keep your eyes open," Meyer says, once again glancing past Attorney Abram and staring at Officer Rhodes. "That I will, sir. So can I ask you something?" "Certainly, what can I do for you?" Meyer asks. "You said that you never considered coming to Hilltop before Mr. Greenberg died, is that correct?" Councilman's wide smile fades. "Yes, sir, that is correct." "Then perhaps you can tell me what you met with Mr. Greenberg about the morning that he died." "What makes you think that I met with Mr. Greenberg?" "Well, I heard from a reliable source that you approached him about buying this storefront the day that he died, but surely not if you had never considered putting an office in Hilltop before." Councilman Meyer stands there for a moment, staring flatly at Attorney Abram, and then finally responds, "Okay, so you caught me. Yeah, I had considered coming here, and maybe my using Mr. Greenberg's tragic death at the hand of those devils could be considered as a propaganda speech to build up my platform to protect my people, but I'm confident that if Mr. Greenberg were alive and he saw my little white lie today, he would have seen it as a means to protect the people of Hilltop, and he would have embraced it as a minor necessary evil to achieve a greater good. Perhaps, Abram responds, nodding his head. I just wondered. You have a great day, sir, and thank you for defending the people of Hilltop. Councilman Meyer doesn't respond, he just turns away from David, who in turn walks back over to Officer Rhodes. Chapter 4 Imagine. Within a few days, Meyer's campaign headquarters is having an open house in an attempt to bring his campaign to the people. Councilman Meyer, phony smile in place, is manning the barbecue grill, along with one of his aides, cooking hot dogs as other staff members are putting them together and handing them out with sodas to the crowd that has joined together to listen to political speeches, and to a Beatles tribute band that is performing some of the group's biggest hits. Well, Officer Rhodes says to David Abram, isn't this a friendly little gathering? David smiles at his friend's sarcasm. David says, I'll tell you one thing that I'm noticing, there are very few people in this crowd that are actually from Hilltop. That's strange, Rhodes comments. Yeah, I mean whoever thought that a Jewish community wouldn't flock to a weenie roast, David says nearly laughing. I mean we all know what a big seller hot dogs are from the local kosher deli. Wait, I thought Meyer was Jewish. Rhodes asks. Yeah, the good councilman must have forgotten, David responds. Both friends have a slight laugh, as the tribute band breaks into John Lennon's song Imagine. The concert suddenly becomes a reenactment of Woodstock, as supposed strangers wrap their arms around one another, singing the very familiar words or humming the well-known tune. As the song ends, Councilman Meyer takes a microphone in hand, and stands there, looking out at the crowd. An uneasy hush falls, as Councilman Meyer appears to wipe tears from his eyes, and begins, Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me for just a moment, for that song has always meant so much to me, and I believe, hearing it again, in the trying times in which we live, I finally know why. Just look at one another, and consider the unity that each one of you felt as you heard the words of that song reverberate, not only in your ears but from within your hearts. Ladies and gentlemen, this song is our call to unity, it is the anthem of this generation, and it is the new platform for my campaign. The last few months our community has seen its share of religious persecution, well no more. As Councilman Meyer makes this powerful proclamation, the crowd begins a controlled cheer. But the question is, how do we stop it? Is the answer more law enforcement? Meyer asks, or perhaps, maybe the answer is a vigilante, such as this Samson character. I mean, I have moved my office here to stand with you, my brethren, even promoting this political block party right here in the open. Do you see Samson here? Meyer asks laughingly. I don't see him, do you? As if in response, the people in the crowd begin looking from person to person, shrugging laughingly as Officer Rhodes and David Abram look at one another. It doesn't matter because Samson isn't the answer. He and the police are just a means to meet violence with violence. Our true answer can be found within our new anthem. Listen as I repeat the words once again, nothing to live or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. If we want to live our lives in peace, then we have to end religious persecution, and we can only end religious persecution if we first end religion, not in our hearts but in our communities. Close the churches, shut the doors of the synagogues, but by all means, worship your God, but do it from home. Don't give the have-nots or any other hate group a point of contention against you. Give up your tax-exempt status, and do your worship in a place where others won't and can't be offended, do it in private. As Meyer stops talking, the crowd erupts in shouts of approval and applause. So that's why the locals have not been encouraged to join in today's festivities, David says to Officer Rhodes. Because Councilman Meyer knew that the people of Hilltop would never have applauded at such a ludicrous idea, and he wanted the press to see the look of unity and approval as he spoke. Finally, unable to take Meyer's smug attitude any longer, David speaks up, Councilman Meyer, a city council can't end religious freedom. He says sarcastically. Not alone I can't, but as you can see and hear, I'm not alone, Meyer says with a smile on his face, his hands slowly lifting in victory, shouting celebration with the people. If this ignorant concept had been isolated to the meaningless rant spoken by a minor political figure at a block party, nothing would have ever come of it, but this public atrocity is being orchestrated by Meyer's wife Jessica, better known as Jezebel of the Raimondo crime family. One of the most violent mob organizations the city of Laramie has ever seen, and she would be willing to do anything that she had to achieve their goals. Chapter 5, From a Song Lyric to a Movement. Following her husband's block party, Jessie calls her henchmen, Anton and Marcus, into her home office. I enjoyed my husband's party today, Jessie says casually as she looks up at her men, so much, so, that I'm thinking about holding a party of my own, only mine is going to be a lot more fun. That sounds interesting. Anton says, returning his mistress's smile. Is there anything that Marcus or I can do to help you prepare for this party of yours? I was hoping that you would ask me that. Jessie says, returning Anton's smile. As my party is going to require a rather unique guest list that I think the two of you could help me with. You see, I'd like to invite a rather large number of toughs, both male and female, with little to no moral scruples. Mrs. Meyer says with a slight smirk. Actually, Anton replies, I think that the two of us can help you with just such a guest list. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I also need these people to be able to blend in with the normal population of Hilltop, Jessie says as she looks at her men inquisitively. So, we hand out some new clothes, Marcus says quietly. No problem. We'll start contacting your party guests immediately, Anton assures his mistress. The next night, Anton and Marcus, following Jessica's instructions, join in with a large number of people protesting in Hilltop's public square. Exchanging whispers with a few of the crowd's leaders, Anton shares Jessie's goals for this demonstration, but then he and Marcus sneak off, blending in with the crowd. Within minutes, the local press shows up, thanks to a quick anonymous phone call from Jessica Meyer. With cameras rolling, protesters carry picket signs with the words, "Imagine, make it stop," or "Shut down the churches," written on them. Others begin chanting the lyrics to the John Lennon song Imagine, while still others begin screaming, "Shut it down." The leaders, that Anton had just spoken to, begin moving throughout the crowd, whispering directions to those in attendance. With each whisper, the crowd seems to become angrier and angrier, their singing, chanting, and even yelling intensifies, but unknown to anyone in the crowd, their every move is being observed, for David Abram, in his guise of Samson, wearing black cargo pants, combat boots, no shirt, military vest, and his now iconic mask covering the top half of his face, with the Star of David overlaid by a cross stitched into the forehead, has taken up a position near the fountain, just in the center of Hilltop's town square, off to the right-hand side of the now nearly irate crowd. It's then that police start showing up. At first there are just a couple of squad cars, containing terrified police officers, but then off-duty staff begins getting called in. Some of the crowd picks up rocks and throws them, striking both buildings, and police cars. The sound of shattering glass is muffled only by the sound of the screaming crowd. The police begin exiting their vehicles, opening their trunks, to suit up in riot gear, but almost immediately the protesters attack. Some in the crowd begin winging their rocks, not at police cars, but at police officers. One young officer, a rookie named Eric Chavez, who had just pulled his gear out of his trunk, is struck in the head before he can put his helmet on. A couple of fellow officers spot Eric laying on the ground, blood streaming from an open wound. They move in Eric's direction to render first aid, when a surge of protesters intercept them, knocking them to the ground. Police officers are being attacked and beaten by hordes of people all over the square. Many now use the rocks that they had been throwing as makeshift clubs. As Officer William Rhodes pulls up, he is immediately set upon by a group of protesters, who grab and begin shaking his patrol vehicle. He sits there in his car, nearly going into shock as he calls out to the people that are attacking him, trying to get them to back off. In answer to his pleas, one protester takes a large stone and begins using it as a hammer, beating and breaking Bill's driver's side window. Once the window is smashed out, the rioters reach into the car and grab Officer Rhodes and begin dragging him out, punching and kicking the terrified officer, but thankfully, he's not as alone as he feels. Samson, dressed for combat, is sneaking toward Rhodes, doing his best to get to him, as unseen as possible. Finally, just as Samson prepares to attack, he brings his chauffeur to his lips, and with a sudden blast of air, he announces his presence, causing the previously unimpeded rioters to stop their attack, in some cases relinquishing their hold on shaken police officers, giving officers the chance to regroup. Samson pulls some metal bearings, smaller than golf balls but larger than gum balls, from his vest pocket and wings them, striking and downing one and then two of the combatants that are blocking him from getting to his fallen friend. Then drawing out a smoke bomb, Samson ignites it and tosses it amid the rioters that are standing near Officer Rhodes' patrol vehicle. As the smoke confuses the crowd, Samson attacks them with a flurry of punches and sidekicks. David knows the people of Hilltop, and he knows that none of these people are them, so these are not upset citizens, they are there with a purpose, and that purpose was evident the moment that their protest became a street fight. Illinois troopers as well as tactical teams, nearby community officers, deputy sheriffs, dispatchers, and even county correctional officers begin rolling in, intervening to disperse the crowd, rescuing downed officers, and taking several rioters into custody. At the same time, Samson knocks several combatants to the ground, using his expandable baton to beat fighters back from him and his friend. Then reaching down, he pulls Bill Rhodes to his feet and helps him to back away from the combat zone. Once in the clear, Samson lays Bill Rhodes at the feet of two state police officers, whose first thought is to take this oddly dressed man into custody, but recognizing Officer Rhodes, they know that Samson is on their side. As the scene becomes more stable, ambulances begin to arrive. EMTs are jumping from their vehicles, rendering aid to fallen officers, as well as downed rioters. Samson, still kneeling beside Officer Rhodes, looks up, politely thanking the two state police officers who are standing alongside him for their service, and asks them to watch over his injured friend. Samson then turns from them, and the riot, and darts out of sight, quickly blending in and disappearing into the darkness. Chapter 6: The Ultimatum. The next day, Samson reverts to his normal life as attorney David Abram. Walking into his office, his secretary Catherine, who arrived at the office an hour before he did, hands him his morning messages. One of the messages is a call from Councilman Meyer. David takes a seat behind his desk, breathing heavily, not wanting to deal with Meyer after all that he went through last night, but then before he can return Meyer's call, Catherine buzzes his office. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Abram," Catherine says pleasantly, "but Councilman Meyer is on the phone for you." "Thank you, Catherine," David responds, as he reluctantly picks up the receiver. "Good morning, Councilman Meyer, what can I do for you?" "Good morning, Mr. Abram. I suppose that you heard about the peaceful demonstration that took place in Hilltop last night?" Councilman Meyer asks rather abruptly. "Peaceful demonstration?" David asks confusedly. "It was my understanding that it was a riot." "Well, of course it ended up like that," Meyer says angrily. "That's what happens when scared and frustrated people are attacked by police using Gestapo-like tactics." David takes a deep breath, doing his best not to show his personal feelings on the subject. "Well, I apologize, Councilman Meyer, apparently my information is flawed, so what can I do for you?" "I'd like to hire you, and your office, to represent the protesters that were arrested," Meyer says flatly. "Why are you hiring the legal counsel for rioters that you don't even know?" David asks. "Protesters," Councilman Meyer corrects. "As citizens of Hilltop, they are my constituents, and as scared and frustrated Jews they are my brethren," Meyer says passionately. "I know that when you spoke to me, you had expressed a desire to use your legal knowledge to defend our people, so if you were serious about that, then I'm willing to invest my money in that effort." David sits there for a moment, contemplating the legal ramifications of using his position as an attorney to so much as view the arrest reports of rioters only to later have his alter ego become known. This would, after all, be a major conflict of interest. He had fought these people, helping the police incarcerate several of them. "So, what's the hesitation, David? If your concern is the money, I assure you that I am good for it." "No, not at all, Councilman. My concern is just the misinformation that I expressed at the beginning of our conversation. If you don't mind, I'd like to review the case files, and I'll give you a call back in the morning." "So, you're willing to leave our brethren incarcerated, based on lies that you have been told?" Meyer asks angrily. "Well, I am assuming that if you're throwing the money at their defense, you'll also be fitting the bill for their release," David retorts. It's then Councilman Meyer that sits in silence until after several moments he finally responds, "Fair enough, call me in the morning, and we'll set things up." As David begins to respond, the phone suddenly goes dead. "Well, that was rude," David says, looking at his telephone receiver. David rings his receptionist. "Hey Catherine, sorry, this thing with Meyer is going to take up my day. I'm going to need you to clear my schedule. Have our associates handle what they can, and reschedule what they can't." "Yes sir, Mr. Abram," Catherine responds. David leaves his office en route to the Hilltop Police Precinct. Upon his arrival, he makes a beeline to his good friend, Officer William Rhodes' desk. "Hey buddy," Rhodes says in greeting. "I wanted to thank you for saving my tail last night. I just knew that it was over for me, and then I heard that chauffeur and I saw that cross emblazoned mask of yours, and I knew that I was going to be all right." "Hey, don't mention it. If I remember correctly, it was you who saved me that night at the hospital. If not for you, I'd probably be in prison right now." "Well, I'll tell you what, how about if I let you buy me a burger and we'll call it even?" "I'd love to, but I'm in kind of a quandary. Meyer called me this morning." "Really? Well, I'm glad to hear that the two of you are becoming so close," Rhodes says with a laugh. "Though the thought of that makes me sick, I prefer that, to what the call was actually about. It seems that our good councilman is securing legal counsel for the rioters that you and your boys put in jail last night, and he'd like me to represent them." "So, say no," Rhodes says nonchalantly. "It's not that easy, Bill. If I refuse, people are going to wonder why, and they might start asking questions." "Shoot, I can't even look at the incident reports, because if I do, and it's later learned that I am Samson, every conviction that may have occurred would be kicked to the curb. Then don't look at the incident reports, go down and have a good look at their booking reports. Their booking reports? Sure, take note of where they are from, and then check their criminal history reports. That is just general information, and has nothing to do with their cases. Perfect. Then I can refuse, with no questions asked. Well then, my old friend, maybe we do have time for a burger after all. Heck with that, I want a steak. Then let's go and get one. David responds with a laugh. Meanwhile, the Meyer residence receives an unexpected visitor, for as Marcus answers the door, he stands face to face with Frank the Reaper Carden, infamous mafioso, and Jessica Meyer's father. Good morning, sir, Marcus says nervously. Mr. Carden, with little more than a glance in Marcus' direction, walks into the house, moving past the low-level enforcer, giving him no response. Oh, my goodness, Daddy, Jessica Meyer calls out, as she sees who Marcus has escorted into the main receiving room. Good morning, my dear. Mr. Carden responds to his daughter pleasantly. The two politely embrace and then take a seat on the couch. So, what brings you out this morning? Jessica asks. I think you already know the answer to that question, Angel. I saw the news last night, and some of those protesters looked familiar. I'm sorry, Daddy, what protesters? I missed the news last night. You know exactly which protesters I'm talking about. Mr. Carden responds angrily. Don't test my intelligence by diminishing yours. I've used several of those same thugs myself, so I recognized your handiwork, and I'm not willing to put the family at risk because of something that you or your idiot husband is doing. I want this stopped, immediately. In the meantime, Attorney Abram finishes his research and decides that it's time for him to present his findings to Councilman Meyer. I apologize for bothering you at home, Councilman, David says pleasantly as Meyer answers his call. But you wanted me to look into defending the Hilltop protesters. Well, I've spent the afternoon looking at the booking reports and the criminal histories of each of the arrestees, and I'm glad that I did. Why is that? Meyer asks, in a partial huff. Because I learned that none of these people are residents of Hilltop, and each of them has a quite lengthy criminal history, so I believe that they were there looking for trouble. The phone goes silent, without so much as the sound of breathing on the other side. Councilman Meyer, are you still there? Attorney Abram asks, noticing that the phone seems to have gone dead, which it has for Councilman Meyer. Growing frustrated, hangs up on David in mid-sentence, but the call was made, and no one's rights were infringed, so all in all David accomplished what he set out to do. Councilman Meyer walks into the receiving room, oblivious to the conversation that is taking place between his wife and her father. Hi, Dad. Meyer says to Mr. Carden. I hope that everything is all right. I mean, it's not often that we are blessed with a visit. No, Ben, it isn't. I need you to distance yourself from this situation in Hilltop. As you know, I'm a businessman, and let's just say that some of my associates are unhappy with the publicity that Hilltop is bringing. Well, I appreciate your concerns, but my involvement in this situation extends only as far as my authority as a councilman. I represent these people, and their rights are more important to me than any of your business concerns. Mr. Carden begins looking around mockingly. Look, Ben, save your sound bites for the press. You know how much my business contributed to your campaign during the last election, and if my friends remain uncomfortable, that money may be donated to your adversary next time. Councilman Meyer stands there dumbfounded, as Mr. Carden addresses his daughter once again. You know where I and my associates stand on this. Leave it alone, Jessica, or the next time my visit may not be as friendly. Jessica's father stands to his feet, and immediately storms out of the room, proceeding out the front door. I hope that everything's all right, Councilman and Mrs. Meyer, Marcus says as he enters the room. Councilman Meyer, ignoring Marcus' show of concern, walks out of the room visibly angry. Everything's fine, Marcus. I do, however, have a job for you and Anton. Jessica then proceeds to explain the next phase of her plan, totally dismissing her father's warning. Marcus stands there, a slight look of shock on his face. Is there a problem, Marcus? No, ma'am, I understand, Marcus says reluctantly. It'll be done, just as you have instructed. With this said, Marcus and Jessica exit the room, Jessica to calm her enraged husband, and Marcus en route to Hilltop. Chapter 7, The Burning of Hilltop. Anton, busy running an errand for Councilman Meyer, is forced to rely on Marcus to initiate the next phase of Jessica Meyer's plan. Marcus, dressed in a black leather jacket, with the familiar logo of the Have-Nots prominently displayed on his back, pulls his car onto a side street, parking under a streetlight, near the community's Baptist church. He quickly exits his vehicle, pops his trunk, and removes a small liquid-filled bottle with a rag stuffed inside, glancing over his shoulder to confirm that the news crew, that Jessica anonymously tipped off, is in position videoing his every move. Finally, removing a lighter from his jacket pocket, Marcus lights the Molotov cocktail that he just removed from his trunk, and tosses the now-lit incendiary device through the nearest window of the church, keeping his back to where he had seen the camera crew. The smashing bottle, and the splattering gasoline, caused the open flame to erupt into a large fire, engulfing the sanctuary of the church within minutes. Then, as quickly as Marcus appeared on the scene, he vanishes. A few hours later Marcus arrives at the Meyer estate, where he is met in the driveway by his associate, and somewhat friend, Anton. "You idiot, the press got your license plate on camera," Anton yells, keeping Marcus in his car. "I don't know how you screwed up so badly, but you're going to have to clear out as Mrs. Jessica is convinced that the police are going to show up here, or maybe even worse." "Worse? What could be worse than the cops?" Marcus asks inquisitively. "Frank the Reaper Carden, yes, Mrs. Jessica's father. He would be a lot worse than the cops. You probably recall him coming here earlier. Well, he told Mr. and Mrs. Meyer to have no more involvement with the issues happening in Hilltop, and then you go and do this." "But Mrs. Jessica sent me there," Marcus responds nervously. "She didn't tell you to use your car," Anton says, pulling his sidearm from its holster, and pointing it in the face of his longtime counterpart. Then, with the pull of a trigger and the flash of a gunshot, Marcus' life comes to an end. "Sorry buddy, but someone has to take the fall on this, and it isn't going to be me," Anton says coldly as he dials his cell phone. Within minutes 2 more of Anton's associates are on the scene, disposing of Marcus' body, and his car. In the meantime, Jessica is on the phone with her father, trying to do damage control. "Daddy, I had no idea that Marcus was associated with that gang. I mean, who would have thought?" After several moments of silence, Jessica cries out to her father again. "Daddy, please believe me." Mr. Carden reluctantly responds, "I believe you. I just hope that my associates do. Now, please remove yourself from the Hilltop equation, before I have to do it for you," Mr. Carden says flatly, hanging up on his daughter without saying another word. Councilman Meyer walks into the room as Jessica hangs up the phone. "Did you clear all of this mess up with your dad?" Meyer asks nervously. "I mean, I don't want your dad's money going to someone else's campaign." "Yes, honey. Everything is fine," Jessica responds with a sigh. "Good," Ben responds somberly, walking back out of the room. "Anton," Jessica calls out. "Yes, ma'am," Anton responds as he enters the estate's receiving room. "Did you take care of Marcus?" Jessica asks in little more than a whisper. "Yes, ma'am," Anton responds calmly. "Good. Now, I need you to go back to Hilltop tonight. You need to make it appear as though Marcus and his band of brothers are still at war with the people of the community." "Wait, now I've always done everything that you have told me to do, but I just killed Marcus to cover up what he did in Hilltop. Now you're telling me to go back there, and continue doing it. You murdered Marcus, not for what he did, but instead because he did it stupidly. You killed him for allowing the television camera to view his license plate, thereby exposing not only himself but all of us to the public." "Look," Jessica whispers, placing her temper in check as she walks up to Anton, flirtatiously, gently brushing her hand against his cheek. "We both know that my husband is an idiot. My father only put him on the city council to use his political position to further the family business, but his usefulness is about used up. You, on the other hand, are a man on the inside of the family. I could see you taking my husband's place, maybe not on the council, but perhaps with me in my home." "Ma'am," Anton responds flatly. "A husband is the last thing that I ever want to be, but as you know, the family business is very important to me, so if you'll just tell me what to do, I'll do it." Jessica smiles and begins laying out her plan, explaining how this time she would not be contacting the media, but the destruction that is to be done has to be evident to any reporters that conduct follow-up stories. A few hours later, Anton and a couple of his counterparts show up near the outskirts of Hilltop, doing their best to stay in the shadows. Putting on mock-ups of the have-nots' leather jackets, arming themselves with several Molotov cocktails, small clubs, and of course, handguns hidden under their jackets, they quickly separate, scattering into the small community. One of them silently approaches, and then smashes a side window of the local Jewish synagogue, tossing a Molotov cocktail into the foyer area, lighting the room on fire. Anton soon arrives at the local Messianic Jewish church, replicating his partner's actions at the synagogue, while the third simulated have-not arrives at the Hilltop Lutheran Church, and quickly ignites it on fire. In the meantime, David is in his prayer room, a small den, located just off the living room of his Hilltop home, lost in communion with God. David, who is on his knees, prays and worship music playing lightly in the background, cries out, asking God to forgive him for his sins, both those that he knows and perhaps those that he had committed out of ignorance. It is then that David catches a whiff of smoke. At first, he tries not to allow the smoke to distract him, but the odor gets worse, nearly choking him as he breathes. Leaving his prayer room, David looks out his window and sees a large amount of smoke rising, not only from his church but from other locations throughout the community as well. Knowing the fire that Marcus had started just the night before, David grabs his cell phone and dials 911 to report the possible fires. Hanging up his phone, David grabs his Samson guise and throws it on, exiting his home to investigate. Seeing Anton's dark silhouette moving away from the now burning church, moving toward the outskirts of town, Samson gives chase. Finally catching his adversary, Samson, standing approximately 12 feet away, places his chauffeur to his lips and gives it a long low blast, sending chills down Anton's spine. As Anton spins around to face him, Samson launches into a jumping sidekick, striking Anton in the chest, knocking him to the ground. Anton lays there for a few minutes, trying to catch his breath, as his two partners come running, swinging wildly at Samson, who is now in defensive mode, blocking their numerous punches and strikes. Samson drops to the ground, ducking one of the men's sidekicks, as Samson simultaneously spins while in a squatted position, sweeping the man, hitting him with so much force that he nearly breaks the man's leg. The second man throws a front snap kick at Samson, who, still in a squatted position, easily blocks the kick and then follows up with a two-knuckle punch to the man's groin. All three arsonists are now on the ground, but Anton sits up, draws his weapon, and points it at Samson, firing one then a second shot at him. With some quick moves, Samson avoids being hit, but then Anton re-aims his weapon at him. Samson, knowing the danger that he is in, quickly reaches into his vest pocket, and flings a ball bearing at Anton, striking him in the hand, knocking the gun from his grip. At this moment the sound of sirens and lights surround the men, as police, drawn by the sound of shots being fired, respond to the area. Samson, refusing to be taken into custody, smashes a handful of smoke pellets on the ground, and vanishes, leaving the mocked-up have-nots to suffer the consequences of their actions. Chapter 8, You've Gone Too Far. No sooner does Anton arrive at the police precinct than Officer Bill Rhodes escorts him into an interrogation room. After reading him his rights, Officer Rhodes asks Anton, "So what were you and your friends doing in Hilltop tonight?" "I was working undercover," Anton responds. "See, I was trying to prove to you, and all of those half-hearted cops like you, that the have-nots still pose a risk to the people of Hilltop," Anton responds angrily. "So, you are expecting me to believe that you burned churches to protect the people of Hilltop?" Bill asks. "I didn't burn anything," Anton responds, glaring at Officer Rhodes. "Yeah, I suppose those churches just broke out into flames via spontaneous combustion," Rhodes says mockingly. "I don't know how those churches caught fire. Maybe it was those members of the have-nots that I was with tonight, or maybe it was other members that I wasn't with. There was quite a smell of smoke on you and your friends. I guess you weren't in Hilltop tonight, Officer Rhodes, because everything there had quite a smell of smoke on it, so that smell of smoke offers you no proof that I or the other two men I was with had anything to do with burning anything. Now, I'm done talking to you. I'd like to call my attorney." "That won't be necessary," Captain John says as he walks into the interrogation room. "You are free to go, Officer Davis. I've already verified your undercover status, and it's my understanding that the two men you were with were your confidential informants, so they are also free to go." "What?" Officer Rhodes yells as he jumps to his feet. "This man is no more a cop than are the thugs he was arrested with. You need to focus your energy on apprehending this Samson character, and stop harassing law-abiding citizens and fellow law enforcement officers." As Officer Rhodes begins to interject, Captain Johns interrupts him again. "We have very few allies, Officer Rhodes. Maybe you need to stop pushing those few that we do have away from us. Now, this conversation is over. Officer Davis and his sources are free to go. You, on the other hand, will remain in this room until they are released, then you will go home. If my orders are not followed, then Officer Rhodes, your exit from this building may become permanent." Captain Johns and Anton Davis then exit the interrogation room. As Officer Rhodes jumps to his feet and tries to follow them, another uniformed officer steps between him and the door, blocking him from leaving the room. Anton and his two cohorts finally leave the police station, walking down the quiet streets of Hilltop, en route to their vehicle. A black Cadillac pulls alongside the three men, not stopping, but driving very slowly when suddenly the sound of automatic weapons and the flash of muzzle blasts light up the street. Anton and his two companions fall to the sidewalk, each bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. One of the shooters jumps from the back seat of the car, checks each of the men, and announces they're dead. The shooter then jumps back into the car, and they drive off as police officers, including Officer Rhodes and Captain Johns, come running out of the police station. "Who provided you with confirmation that Anton Davis was working undercover?" Officer Rhodes asks Captain Johns. I spoke to City Councilman Meyer. So, Meyer knew that they were here. Yes, Captain Johns responds. Meyer is one of us. Yeah, I can tell. Officer Rhodes says disbelievingly. At about that same time, there is a knock at the Meyer estate's main door. As Jessica hesitantly answers it, she is relieved to see her father standing there, but she is concerned that he has his security staff, not waiting in his car, but at the door with him. Hi, Daddy, Jessica says, trying to sound as pleasantly surprised as she can. Frank the Reaper Carden, Jessica's daddy stares at her blankly. I told you to stay out of Hilltop, but you just couldn't leave it alone, could you? Oh, Daddy, I did leave it alone. Why did something happen? Your phone is tapped, Jessica, and your idiot husband got a phone call from the Hilltop Police Department, telling him that your security officer was in custody. They caught Marcus? Jessica asks, trying to sound surprised. No, the other one, whatever his name was. Jessica repeats softly. Was. He knew too much, Jessica, not only about you, but about the family, and we couldn't take a chance on some low-level foot soldier becoming an informant because of your stupidity. And yes, Mr. Carden interjects, stopping his daughter from interrupting. I said your stupidity as it was your husband that told the police that your muscle was working undercover in Hilltop. I wonder why your man, not only the first one, but the second one, was in Hilltop, supposedly with your husband's knowledge. I'm sure that Ben was just trying to protect him, Jessica says sadly, looking down at her feet. I wish I could believe that, or I wish that I could believe that your husband was working alone, but I can't on either count. Mr. Carden reaches out, taking his daughter in his arms. I love you, Jessica, more than I could ever put into words, but I warned you. I covered for you with Mr. Raimondo more than once, but even I can't do it again. But Daddy, Jessica says, trying to sound like his little girl. Councilman Meyer walks into the room. Well, good evening, Dad, what brings you out this time of night? Mr. Carden nods at one of his security men, who instantly backfists Councilman Meyer in the throat. Ben Meyer falls to his knees, gasping for breath. The thug then pulls a gun from his waistband and points it at Meyer's head. No, Mr. Carden tells his thug. For a moment Jessica reads this as her father's sign of mercy. Maybe he is just delivering another warning, she thinks to herself, but then he tells his man, we have to make it look like an accident. This investigation ends tonight. Mr. Carden takes his daughter by the arm and walks her out the estate's main door, tears streaming down her terrified face. Two of his thugs grab Councilman Meyer by the arms, lifting him to his feet, and drag his already nearly lifeless body out the door. Another thug opens a small box, picking up the keys to the Myers car. They then all leave the house, the Myers television left on. The next morning, daytime broadcasting is interrupted, and a female reporter, whose words are echoing through the Myers' now empty mansion, announces,
It's a sad day for the city of Laramie, for Councilman Benjamin Meyer and his wife Jessica were tragically killed in either the late night or early morning hours in a horrific traffic accident. Local law enforcement reports indicate that the vehicle they were traveling in plummeted over the Double Creek Bridge, sinking into the depths of Black Bear Lake. The family has asked that donations be made to the Laramie City Council so that they can be distributed to charities throughout the city instead of flowers. We now return you to your regularly scheduled broadcasting.
Councilman and Jessica Meyer confused their worldly positions with spiritual authority. They believed themselves capable of opposing God, but Galatians 6 verse 7 says, Do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man, person, sows, that he, she, will also reap. Jessica and Benjamin Meyer reaped what they sowed, not just in this life, but in the eternity they found themselves in. How about you? Are you prepared for what awaits you? I hope so, because none of us are guaranteed more time than we have right now.